Welcome to the Core Experience, your connection to community, business, and the people who make it all happen with your host, Brandon Suba.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Core Experience. This is the Core Bank podcast that brings on a lot of professionals. We have some of our employees that come on, and we just like to share some banking experience, some banking knowledge, and then a lot of the nonprofits that we're very fortunate to work with here on the show. And today I'm super stoked because my guest is somebody that I work very close with. We're both in the Treasury Department together, but then his background, and he'll talk briefly about this, I'm sure, but his background is actually in radio. So we've both have been on the mics for a while. You professionally, me semi-professional.
Best of both worlds.
Semi-pro, right?
Oh, yeah.
We'll say on that one. So with me today, though, I have Steve Smith, and Steve Smith is a relationship manager in the Treasury Department, just like me. And between me, Steve, and Brandon Schrader, we're the relationship managers. And I got to give a shout out to Haley and Nicole. They do the servicing. They do a phenomenal job. And then we have Kyle kind of manning the ship. Is that the right way to say it?
I think so.
The ship, manning the ship. Anyways, he's
someone will probably correct us later.
That's fine. Ernesto might. But what I love about this podcast is we do the editing and everything in house. So minus Pixel Fire for letting us use their beautiful location here. This is all done by bankers. It's really kind of funny.
I'm just as surprised as everybody else probably is.
So today we are going to focus on one of the Treasury products that we offer within the department. And that product is Positive Pay. Now, I'm just announcing it. Steve here is the professionalologist, which that's a word I like to use, and it's not a real one. But he's the professionalologist of the Positive Pay, and we have a handful of customers that utilize this service. It's a great service. I worked with a client, kind of onboarding them one time, and once you onboard, you really see the value of what Positive Pay has to offer. But like I said, I'll let Steve kind of get more into this before I try to bombard the whole podcast. So, Steve, you've got a little background in banking. So why don't you catch us up from your broadcasting days to now being here at Core?
Yeah, today is kind of a weird full circle moment for me, but I was in broadcasting and journalism when I was at UNL, and I've been with Core Bank specifically for the last 6 years, and there's a little bit of experience in everything on the retail side. I did some lending. I worked with a lot of small businesses and consumers on the deposit side, and over the last 3 years, I've really narrowed down my focus to work with businesses, and some of that was on servicing, implementation, a lot of what Brandon referred to. Haley and Nicole are two great people we have on the team who work to do those things in and out every day. And over the last year, I've spent a lot of time as a relationship manager working with Brandon and our other Brandon, who's not with us today, to work as liaisons more directly for our business clients within the bank.
And you worked your way up through the ranks, but you started at Core coming fresh out of college, didn't you?
Yeah, I was a teller to start. I always joke with people, and there's probably a lot of people who are going to listen to this podcast who've heard this before, but I always say it kind of just spiraled into a career. Mm-hmm. I took it as an opportunity really to learn something that I had no information or background with, and just decided I was going to run with it and see where it took me. And over the last 3 years, it's taken me into every nook and cranny of Treasury to learn. And that's been, I think, one of the best, most challenging parts, is to learn about businesses, to learn about what their priorities are, what their day-to-days look like, and to understand how we as a bank and us as a Treasury Department can help ease that process, make it more efficient, and ultimately, as we talk more about Positive Pay, make it more secure. I'm in a Center Sphere group, and so I talk about Treasury, right? And people always think it's kind of boring. Well, I had my presentation a couple weeks ago, and I had more people come up to me and say, number one, I understand more what you do, but two, like, you got to make it fun, right? And I do. I think we have a very fun team. So when we do have a business we're working with, one, you get a whole team by your side, but two, we're not the stuffy bankers. And I've said that before. We're the fun team
that likes to, like you said, take care of your business, take care of your banking needs, and I've enjoyed that too. Just as I've had the opportunity to learn treasury.
Yeah, I don't know. The way you did that intro kind of screamed stuffy, so we may have to work on that a little bit and up it.
That's why they let me do this. Okay, so one of the main things we use Positive Pay for is fraud. And I will say, in all my years of banking, I have 6 years of banking, but it's cut up. It's not straight like yours was. And I've never seen fraud like we are seeing today. And I think technology plays into it as a big piece. Who knows what AI is going to do in the future? I mean, it used to be kiting, where somebody would write a check to one bank and then cash it at the other bank and try to just stay ahead of it. And technology really doesn't even make that easy anymore. But Steve, give us a little experience of your history of fraud and what you've seen over your time in banking.
You know, you mentioned a couple examples, and I think when it comes to fraud, I think there's a number of different ways that you could approach it and think, why is it happening? Why is it ramping up? And you're right, since 2020, a lot of statistics will show that since COVID really impacted culture and society, that fraud has really started to ramp up. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately really what it comes down to, because there's so many different ways to commit fraud, is how are you protecting your information? We live in a world right now where technology is quite literally at our fingertips. Yep. And it gives us access to the world, but the unfortunate part of that as well is that it kind of gives the world access to us as well. Like that. And that includes our information, and more directly in banking, that can have a bigger impact, and that includes a lot of different things, especially when it comes to consumers versus businesses. Mm-hmm. And technology has really driven it. It's given fraudsters a lot of new ways to, unfortunately, be creative with how they approach trying to secure that information. A big one that has really revved up over the last couple of years has been business email compromise. And unfortunately, in 2022, I believe, was the year it was reported that there was $2.7 billion in losses just based on email fraud. But the other side of that too, though, is that people still write checks. It's one of those things in banking that we can't seem to get away from, but they've been around, and it's something that still people prioritize using with all the technology out there still. And it continues to be one of the biggest cases of payment fraud that businesses still tend to experience. And I think it was again in 2022, still after COVID, that there were about $21 billion in losses just from payment fraud alone, and a good portion of that was from checks.
Wow. You know, we talk about changing your email or your passwords all the time. And as bankers, for security on our side, we change our passwords constantly. It's a little annoying, but I understand why. But just think about how many people have an old AOL email account that they're still using, probably been the same password for gosh knows how long. Someone gets access to that, and yeah, we communicate so much in email now that I think that's a huge opportunity for fraud, and we don't even think about it. We don't. I even get a little frustrated. So everything we do is within secure emails, taking anything with a social security number on it, IDs, anything like that. And I'll have people that get frustrated with the secure part, so they'll just email it to me. And I'm like, let's not do that again. I can't control you there, but let's not do that again.
Well, and I think that really drives home another point of that question that I mentioned, is how are you protecting your information? And unfortunately, for a lot of people, taking extra steps to be secure and make sure their information is not easily accessible to other people is inconvenient. And a lot of what we do right now is based on getting it right away, getting things done. And it's important because there's a lot of things that people would prefer, and businesses too, that go on throughout their day that they would rather focus on. And unfortunately, fraud is an unfortunately uncomfortable conversation. And it's one of those things where, in an experience for me, and I'm sure you can speak to this too, that a lot of people don't realize they can be affected by it until, unfortunately, they've been affected by it.
Yep. Like insurance. You don't think you need it until a storm hits, and then all of a sudden you're happy you have it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned checks. We've got check washing. That's the main one I can think of. Altering checks. I mean, like you said, we still use them in this day and age. And I think you were kind of bringing up that stat because Positive Pay is a big piece of securing that opportunity. So let's let's rip it back. Let's rip back the layers
Oh boy.
and talk about positive pay.
Yeah, positive pay is something that has been around in banking for a long time. When you think about businesses and how they go about their day, obviously fraud is bad for everybody. But for businesses, more often than not, those accounts that they have see a lot more activity on a day-to-day basis. They have a lot more payments going in. They might have a lot of payments going out. There's just a lot of money movement. And if there's fraud, that can impact that. And yeah, the bank has a lot of protections and things in place to help recover money. God forbid that something like that were to happen. Mm-hmm. But that's a very reactionary approach. And sometimes when you're a business and you're constantly needing to collect money and send money, that's not the best solution. Sometimes that can impact things outside of the scope of just losing X amounts of dollars. That can impact your vendors, God forbid, payroll, for your employees, a lot of other things. And positive pay really is in place so it can give businesses a proactive solution to getting ahead of fraud. And what I mean by that is positive pay is essentially a fraud filter. It started off really as a check solution for businesses to import a file or import the information for the checks they're actually writing. Then as banks deposit those checks or cash those checks and they bring them back to us, it checks against that file that they submit to make sure that all that information is correct. So that if someone cashed a check or if one got intercepted in the email or in the mail, and tried to change the information, it's going to flag that and let that business owner know that something on this check doesn't look right and give them the opportunity to return that before that check even has the chance to be cashed and the funds to be gone.
And when I was first learning about this, I thought it was really complex. But at the end of the day, it's a check number and a total. And when those two don't match up, the computer says, hey, just want you to double check on this. And I just had a deposit I had to review the other day. It was 47, but the 4 looked like a 9. And it was written in as 47 in the memo part, but the company put it in as 9. Now, this was no fraud. This was just, why is my deposit off? But just think how easy it is to take that 4 and make it 9. You're $50 out more than what you planned.
Yeah, exactly. And the good thing is with technology growing the way it is and the way that a lot of positive pay systems work, is it's smart enough to be able to read who you wrote that check out to, because the bank has to give us that information when they come back to core bank to say this person's cashing a check. So if any of that information doesn't match, it's going to be sure to let you know that something isn't right. And then even on top of that too, the bank, our treasury team specifically, and our operations team as well within the bank, who does a phenomenal job, is constantly monitoring those as well to be sure that if those exceptions come through, or if those checks that don't match the file come through, that we're contacting business owners and we're really getting ahead of fraud before it has the opportunity to take hold. And it's not just checks either. There's a version of positive pay as well, because technology and electronic payments have become so big that there's ACH positive pay filters as well that allow businesses to match the people that they're paying or giving their account information to electronically to be sure that those payments are legitimate.
And I always thought, gosh, how are you going to mess up an ACH? But it's not so much messing it up, although it would catch an error. But it might be if someone gains access that shouldn't and they're sending them out. That's going to be a whole nother step, whole nother process that if they don't have knowledge of, it's going to catch like that.
Well, and the unfortunate thing too is on top of that is if you're writing a check or if you're going to pay your electric bill or any of your utilities, or if you go to any website and you're putting your information in to be paid, the reality of it is you're putting your account information and everything into the internet, or if it's the check, the mail, it's all out there for someone to potentially take and try to use it for fraudulent purposes. And you can control a lot of things. You can send mail securely. You can believe that whoever you're paying or sending ACH files to has their own security in place. But the reality of it is that's not a for sure thing either. So there's a lot of times if you give that information out that whoever you're paying's systems could be compromised and your account information can be a part of that. So there really are, unfortunately, a number of different ways where that information, if it is being given out, can be exposed. And that's just a part of life, unfortunately. But I think that gives a lot of reason and a lot of validity to having services like Positive Pay in place to take a more proactive approach, because like you use the insurance example, it's one of those services that if it's doing its job, you're not going to notice.
Exactly. Yep. But the second it's not,
it can be a lot.
You're going to catch it. Well, and just the experiences that I have with fraud, kind of the aftermath, after it's already happened and the customer's been affected, we sit there and we think of all the things we could have done or all the things that could have happened, right? Mm-hmm. Positive Pay is really that extra peace of mind that we're doing those extra things. Mm-hmm. Client and banker, we are taking care of those pieces. We're putting as much in place as we can, because everybody thinks it's not going to happen to them, or oh no, I'm smarter than that.
Right.
But it catches you at the wrong time, right place, whatever that looks like, and that's when people get the fraud on their accounts.
Yep. And like we were saying, for business owners, that can have a more immediate impact for them, and especially when there's a preventative way to address it. That's why we really have become big proponents of that, because it has been around for a long time. But for us as a treasury group, as a group that wants to be sure that we're putting the best interests of our clients first, that's why we try to have those conversations as often as possible. And it's not just Positive Pay. It's a really great product, and it's something that we push for. But I think there's a lot of things that people can also do on their own to try to take steps outside of having that, to be sure that their information's secure, that their facilities are secure, that they're informed. Education, I think, is a huge piece to that as well, that people, again, as technology grows, that education is going to continue to grow. And it's something that is important to continue to be mindful of, and for us as bankers, but also for everybody as a consumer as well.
So how does somebody get started with Positive Pay at the old bank?
That's a good question. So we have a couple different ways to do it, but myself and you, Brandon, and our other Brandon are great resources for that. So for anybody who is with the bank who has questions about that, definitely feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, we actually do have a dedicated email group as well that is happy to answer those questions or to get that process started. And that email address is treasuryservices@corebank.com.
And one thing that I experienced, and I wanted to share on this, so we think about how much work this could be, right? If you really look at it, it's work. And one of the companies we onboarded, we were able to take what they were currently doing within QuickBooks or a spreadsheet, and we could convert that into the system. So really all they did was upload. So it was one step. It kind of blew my mind. It was one step to put the information that they were already tracking into the Positive Pay process, and then the system took care of the rest. Mm-hmm. So to me, it is an extra step, but it's not multiple extra steps. We can really make systems talk with our system so that it makes it very convenient for the consumer.
Yeah, and this is an example that relates to necessarily a client of ours, but even another example of that, there's a company known as CDK that runs a software system for auto dealers and people within that industry, and they suffered from a system breach, I believe it was about a month or two ago.
Okay.
And they were suffering from ransomware, so whoever hacked in was asking for a ransom of, I can't remember what the dollar amount was, but they were saying that company needed to pay that, or that files and information were going to get released out. And you talk about the timing for getting something set up like that versus the timing. Their systems were shut down for weeks.
Wow. And
that didn't just impact them, that impacted all their clients. And then you think about it too, on even a step further than that, is that anybody who was trying to buy a car from anybody who utilized that software, that was impacting them as well. So the time that it takes to combat fraud while it's happening can take a lot more than the time it takes to prevent it up front.
I think that's a great final statement, but I got to give it. Any final thoughts on Positive Pay?
No, I think that really sums it up as far as the points that we wanted to drive home. And I would say that if anybody has questions for us, never hesitate to reach out to treasuryservices@corebank.com.
And on top of that, for more information on the Core Experience podcast, you can go to corebank.com/podcast, or you can email us at coreexperience@corebank.com. Notice everything's corebank.com here.
Weird.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Steve, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you coming in and being our expert.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for everybody else, we look forward to talking to you on a future podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Core Experience, your connection to community, business, and the people who make it all happen. For more details, go to corebank.com/podcast or email coreexperience@corebank.com. Brought to you by Core Bank, member FDIC.